Commonwealth's attorneys and I have concluded that the NCAA sanctions were overreaching and unlawful.
Someone's got to develop a product that you and I, as a consumer, are going to want to buy.
The country needs a comprehensive energy plan.
Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. You know, in 1982, there was a movie called My Favorite Year starring Peter O'Toole. The gentlemen we're going to talk to today are going to talk about a different year, a year in Happy Valley. My guests today are Eric Porterfield and Erik Proulx. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The premise of that show was a fond memory of working on a TV show and dealing with one of their idols, Peter O'Toole. Your movie, 365 Days in the Life of Happy Valley, a little different take on a year in time. Let's talk about first how you brought your team together to decide to make this movie.
Well, we had our production team that had worked on a film called The Joe We Know. We wrapped and we had been showing the film for a while. And as part of that process, I was asked to come into work on a program with A&E, a documentary crew. And in the process of looking at how they were going to do that film, decided this was not for me personally or professionally. There were liabilities associated with it. So looked into the possibility of creating a film that would take a documentary perspective on a more long-term basis from inside, but knew I couldn't do it as an insider. So looked at really creating the first feature film locally, but with people who are absolutely at the top of the documentary side of the game. So I had seen Erik Proux's work and started harassing him right away. And he had no desire whatsoever to be engaged in this film. And I'll let him describe why. But from that point on, using the great talents of Erik, we actually put together a national crew, people from Los Angeles, New York, Texas, to create not just a documentary, but a theatrical documentary that would be in theaters and that would really stand the test of time.
Eric, since he set you up so well, let's talk about your role in this, the way you were brought in and what you're doing on the film.
So I'm the director. Eric's the producer, executive producer, and he had called me before he had this idea to work on 365 Days. He'd reached out to me because he had seen a film that I had worked on called Lemonade, which is about a bunch of advertising professionals who got laid off around 2008 and reinvented themselves and were better off for being laid off, and they'd come to that realization only after going through that pain, right? And he had seen that, and he called me right away, and we had tried to work together on a couple of things ahead of time. And, you know, a couple of swings and misses, and then he asked me to do this, and I said no, because I was, like everybody else, watching ESPN and getting the vibe that, you know, Penn State created a playground for a child molester, and I'm like, why would I want to work on that? You know, I mean, it's a liability for me professionally, but also, you know, some personal background. I mean, I'm an adult survivor of child abuse myself. And so I had all that anger that builds up in me and the baggage that comes along with that. And I'm like, no way, you know, sure. I'm not going to touch that project. Erik just kind of kept feeding me articles, and I started to question my own, you know, I mean, is this just my own stuff? Is it based on truth? Am I just being a reactionary to what I'm seeing on ESPN? Is ESPN telling me the truth? You know, and not just a single at ESPN, but the national narrative was that, you know, there was a cover-up, and there may or may not be. We still don't know, based on, you know, we won't until the trials come out. But you know, but the inflection that I had to do to put my own issues aside and kind of look at things objectively, once I could grasp that, I said, sure, I'd like to work on this project.
Now, who else is brought into this team besides the two of you? Is everybody named Eric that has to work on the film? Or is there
well, actually, you have to be named Eric or Hagen, or so. It's funny, there are a lot of similar names on the project. But Shauna Hagen, who Erik brought into the project, she was the director of photography for Food Inc., Queen of Versailles. Peter Nelson, who's out of New York, he's worked on a lot of documentary projects for HBO. So, you know, on any given shoot, we may bring in other ancillary personnel, but it all comes with the idea that it's very difficult to put people from the State College region in totality on the crew. So these are award-winning very creative people. And when we say award-winning, we mean associated with Oscar, Emmy type programming. But we really felt that that was necessary. Otherwise, we were pigeonholing ourselves pretty quickly as a State College developed film. And although we are somewhat State College, we actually have our production facilities in Spruce Creek, Pennsylvania, to disassociate ourselves with State College.
Eric,
Yes, sir.
Eric, to you. With being a survivor, certainly that comfort level's got to be something you have to deal with. So is it good to have people you've worked with, so at least you have that side of the subject matter to be a buffer at people you work with?
Sure. I mean, it's good to have objective opinions to bounce things off of. You know, I mean, and the fact is, though, I mean, the child abuse angle of this particular story, the way we're approaching it, is really we're actually covering everything post child abuse. Right. You know, and how the community responds to that issue, to that thing that threw the rest of life in havoc here. And so we're looking at really a groupthink as
Sure.
You know, when an event like that happens, how these masses of people get together and they all just subscribe to one line of thought and react that way.
Right. The film does not start with the indictment of Sandusky or the trial. It actually starts at the beginning of the football season, correct?
Right. It begins on September 1st.
Well, that's when we started filming.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're telling a whole backstory prior to that. Sorry to cut you off. We're telling a whole backstory prior to the beginning of the football season, but that was day one of filming.
So we start at day one of football season, but how far are we going back to the actual indictment to begin, or prior to that?
Well, I mean, prior to the indictment, we explore what life at State College was like. You know, when it was Happy Valley.
Okay.
You know, and you know, so yeah, we explore that.
Okay, that's a good stopping place for us. You're watching For the Record. We're going to discuss more about the upcoming movie after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Our guest today, Eric Porterfield, Erik Proulx. Now, the timeline of the film, 365 days, starts on September the 1st, but you go backwards in time, discussing what led up to the events, etc. And one of the things that I got to see before we started was the new trailer that you put together about how you're comparing the Penn State lifestyle that we were familiar with, as we sort of foreshadowed, and also the Amish community. What made you come up with that idea of comparing the two?
We can't take credit for it. I won't name the person who actually did. No, I will.
It's just the three of us. No one else is going to know.
I was actually at a party with one of the people that worked on The Joe We Know, a guy named Dan Leary, who was a player for Penn State in the 70s. Okay. And we were thinking about the tragic parts of this. And it was actually the night that Paterno died. And we were trying to think of something that was similar in our region that had happened that was really something that had that kind of weight to it. And we came up with Nickel Mines, where the 10 Amish girls were shot, right. 5 die. Mm-hmm. And the amazing thing about that was that the outcome of that event, the way that unfolded and transpired, you think of just the enormity of 5 young girls being tied up, shot, killed, 10 being tied up, and how the Amish responded to that, and I'm not going to spoil the film. It really opened a door in our heads relative to the examination of how communities move forward, which is really what is happening here. The move forward, not move forward. And that's the teachable moment in any film. And also inherent to that were the heroes that you would want to create in a given film. And again, without spoiling the film, our film, we found our heroes in the events then much more easily, I felt. You know, I don't know about you, but...
Absolutely. I mean, there's just such a, there's so much value and honor in getting to the bottom of things and discovering the truth and who knew what when, and the American legal system, and being able to litigate when you need to litigate to make sure justice is served. And there's so much honor and value in that. There's also an incredible amount of honor and value in forgiveness and being able to say, you know what, I can't personally for my own life and wholeness and health and well-being move on until I say, you know what, person who wronged me in one way or another, I have to forgive you, and I can't take you to court. Because I could probably win a huge $1 million case against you, but I choose not to because that would just leave my wounds open, so I choose not to. So, and we really kind of analyze those two paths, and you know, not placing judgment on either, but just saying, you know, they're very different ways to look at life when something bad happens to you.
From your website, I took this describing what the film is going to be. It's a look into the science of how perfectly reasonable human beings are capable of being unreasonable to the point of carelessness. Go into detail about that, if you would.
Well, it sort of speaks for itself. I think we can all find a case in the Sandusky scandal, if we want to call it that, where someone we probably looked up to behaved in a way that was perfectly unreasonable, or the expectation that we had for that person or that group was absolutely not what we had hoped for. And I think it comes in the form of, you know, as a society, as a community, we want to have leaders who have the principles that we believe will stand up to the situation. And when that doesn't happen, when the board acts in a certain way, for example, or an individual within the board acts in a certain way, and that does not jibe with what we had in mind. It's like if your father comes in one night and tells the entire family he's having an affair. It doesn't jibe, and therefore we're even more lost. And so, and that happens all the time. I think our expectations of people are probably not realistic to begin with. You know, Joe Paterno was, by all accounts, as somebody put it in the film, what did Seal say? He wasn't the biggest man on campus. He was the most respected, and for good reason. He lived his life that way. But when put to the test, there are many people in this story who failed that test. Joe Paterno is not one of them.
See, a lot of people in the rush to judgment, that's the great thing about being a documentary film person, taking your time, as opposed to that 15-second soundbite. You can really get to the meat of the whole story.
Well, that was the whole point of 365 days, was taking a full year, because, you know, we could come in on day one, on September 1st, we could come in with our predictions and with our prejudgments and with our own personal feelings about what we thought the film was going to be about. But over the course of the year, and it's changed so many times in just a half a year already. You know, what we thought was, you know, was going to be one thing, and turned into, we thought it was going to be all about rush to judgment, it turned into something else. We thought it was all going to be about forgiveness, we turned into something else. We just kept getting thrown curveballs, and continue to. And that's the beauty of taking a year, is exploring it and not judging ourselves.
And how will you, because it changes so often, does the whiteboard expand that much further in the terms of the curves that you're going through to get the story out?
I think things tend to settle after a period of time. Is what happens is, and to Eric's point, if you go back to the very beginning, our own prejudices are in there, and it's like sifting something. You know, those things fall out pretty quickly if you're going to do this job well. And ultimately, you're left with something, or maybe it's panning for gold. You're left with something that looks, and you look in and you go, that's pretty much it. You know, that's not gone away. That's the heaviest part of this story. And then you have to make a decision. We went to Seattle. We had a script conference with a very talented script advisor. And we ended up where I think we always knew we would be, but with a slightly different structure to the story. But I think now we have very defined lines, and we have to, because we have to start really focusing. But I don't think we're surprised by anything that we have found at this point. I think what we went into it with was a preconception about certain things: prejudice, you know, herd mentality, compulsive behavior that has us just following other people's leads despite not having any information whatsoever, even to our own detriment, our personal detriment. So those themes, they exist in their truth, and they're pretty undeniable, just like forgiveness. You can say what you want about it, but at the end of the day, it is what it is, and there's proof of that, and we're going to show that in the form of the Amish.
That's a good stopping point for us. When we come back, we'll discuss who was interviewed for the movie. You're watching For the Record on WHVL. Back with more after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Our guest today, Eric Porterfield, Erik Proulx. you mentioned in the last segment the truths that you've discovered along the way. Can you share some of those that you found so far?
Well, I think truth is a bit elusive. I mean, truth relative to what we felt would be the storyline. And I think one of the truths is that life boils down to some pretty simple principles. The Amish side of the story is a really easy story to tell in a way because everything in their world relates to something relatively simple. The Lord's Prayer, the way they approach forgiveness, not just as a way of looking at life, but as a way of actually living their life. So those are easy. The truth about the way that Joe Paterno lived his life. He was a humble person. We used to drag people to show friends his house to underscore just what kind of a man he was, and that's true. So there's a relevance to these things that we've gotten away from in the cacophony of scandal. And I think that's truth, is to bring yourself back to something that you knew once to be true. Jung used to say, the psychologist, that we decorate our memories to give ourselves self-satisfaction or protection. And I think that we are trying to get back as a community to what we remember more and more every day. And I think to some extent, we're trying to help them do that by showing them how being true to your communal roots is really important. And again, the Amish do that.
Erik Proulx,
yes, sir.
What difficulty did you have when you went to the Amish community and filming there? Because they are not,
sure.
They don't like to be on film.
Well, and we actually, most of the filming we did was, and this would be giving away, so I don't really want to say too much about it, but most was around people who were not Amish within the Amish community, who were the recipients of a lot of forgiveness.
Gotcha.
But we did get in to talk to one Amish family. We're going back to talk to some more when the crew comes back into town. It's just a lot of face covering or maybe off-camera interviews.
Sure.
Just getting their voices, and yeah, but you're right. They are very reluctant to be on camera, and it's because of their humility. They don't want to put themselves ahead of their community or ahead of God ever. They want to always stay. They always want to stay. They're saying is God first, you second, me third. Mm-hmm. I always want to be not representative of being boisterous or feeling like they're bragging in any way.
How did you select the subjects for interviews for the film?
Well, I think in many ways we were challenging ourselves not to be too obvious. For instance, one of the people, and we can talk about it, is Joel Blunk, who's with the local Presbyterian church. Yes. We were looking for people who could attach themselves, I think, intellectually and spiritually in some ways to both sides of this equation. The idea that, yes, it's okay to have difficulty moving on, and at the same time, giving us a sense of how we might do that. We interviewed Helen Manful, who was at the theater department for many, many years at Penn State, and who gives us anecdotes in the form of Shakespeare. Those kinds of things, those examples are really important in that those people live in our community. They have that perspective that's really, it's long. They're not among the characters that have already been stripped down by the national media and put under a microscope. And I felt that was really important, and in bringing it to Eric.
We also talked to Ryan Beckler, who's a local journalist for Onward State, a student journalist for Onward State, and we talked to, what the student reaction is, because in a lot of ways I hate to use this word because it's not in comparison to Sandusky's victims, but they've been victimized.
Of course.
Just by perception, guilt, and getting that reaction when you're feeling, all I did was just come to school here.
That's right.
And being looked at nationally as some kind of, it's really, it's unfortunate for them as well.
Well, and one of the things you discussed on the website, the herd mentality about commonly formed and commonly destroyed. You're guilty by association just because of where we live, in essence, and that's part of what you're trying to show, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. Let's talk about financing the project. Are you guys writing a check yourselves here? I mean, let's be honest, films using people with talent cost money.
They do. It's an unusual project because it really is a theatrical release film. It's the first major theatrical release film ever produced in State College. So you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there is a core group of people who came together early, local business people, myself, who funded the first part of the film. We also felt that it was really important that the community have a chance to participate in the way that the film came together, and on a number of levels. So we're at that stage now where we're really moving into two things. One is having social funding coming from the community, which is critical. I think it's useful for them to see that somebody's actually talking about this differently, and they should get behind that. And then the second part is we're working with a marketing company to, a sports marketing firm that specializes in entertainment, to give us options relative to distribution. We will be distributing the film through theaters in December, and that'll be revenue. But you know, it's always a challenge, and it's one that Eric can attest to by the grayness of my. I shaved my gray beard before I came on, but. It's very stressful.
Well, to be clear, too, I mean, the filmmakers who are coming in from out of town are not working for their full rates.
Sure.
You know, where everybody, it's a project that people believe in, and because of that, they're willing to work for, you know, less than what they'd get in Hollywood.
Franco Harris is involved in the project. You can, if you donate money, you can get an autographed ball from Franco?
Yeah, so a lot of the guys from the Joe We Know experience are very supportive of what we're doing. Franco's signed balls. John Capoletti, who doesn't generally sign things, has signed a number of balls for us. So yeah, so it's nice to have that kind of support.
It's an interesting dynamic of somebody who's been very outspoken, Franco, and then John Capoletti, who, like you said, doesn't really sign anything, really has not been that out front discussing any of that as well.
Yeah, and I think, again, some of the treadwear we get off of the Joe We Know, and the way that if people have seen it, they know that this is not a patsy piece. We're really not taking an opinion in hand, but they realize that this is a really fine effort that these guys are putting forth, and so.
Well, can you drive people to the website? Talk about that real quickly before we wrap things up.
Sure. The website is 365daysthefilm.com. That's 365daysthefilm.com, and we're launching a Kickstarter campaign this next week to drive some of that social funding he was talking about.
Eric and Eric, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this For the Record. We hope to see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.